Hey, I'm Hailee Steinfeld, and I am in studio with The Hollywood Reporter.
All right, Hailee, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, first of all, congratulations on Dickinson.
Thank you so much.
Such an amazing show, and it's also your first time starring and producing in a project. What was that like?
It was very fun, a little bit stressful at times, but really just an amazing experience. I have some amazing fellow producers on this show, and working with Apple has been a dream. So it's really just been a wonderful experience. Producing is something I've always been interested in doing, and I of course wanted whatever that first project I produced to be something that I felt the way I feel about Dickinson.
Mm-hmm. Did you have any learning curves, being that this was your first time having a producer credit versus just starring in a project?
Absolutely. I mean, there were times where I, would have a few to either go up to my dressing room or to my trailer and I don't know, take a nap, take five. And in those moments I found myself in meetings or on calls or behind the monitor with the directors, which was just so exciting to almost have to be. In other scenarios, I guess I've just kind of, stood back and behind the monitor and kind of observed, but being sort of more in the playing field directly as a producer was definitely something that would occupy all of the downtime, any of the downtime.
Mm-hmm. And what was it about this show that really pulled you in? I mean, was there a scene or a moment when you were reading the script and you thought, all right, I have to be a part of this?
One of the first, if not the first scene of episode 1, if I'm remembering correctly. I'll go with to be safe. One of the first scenes in episode 1, Emily, I think it is the first scene now that I'm thinking about it. Emily is at her desk writing. It's 4 a.m. Lavinia, her sister, comes to the door with 2 empty buckets that need to be filled with water. And she has been, according to her, fetching the water for the last couple of times that they needed to be fetched. And comes to Emily and says, it's your turn. And she basically says, why doesn't Austin do it? That Austin is their brother. And she says, because Austin is a boy, right? He shouldn't have to. He doesn't need to. And Emily's response to Lavinia in that moment, I remember reading it and thinking, that's what this show is. And it has this very modern sense to it in the language and in the music and in a lot of the scenarios. And so that response that she had then, it all kind of clicked. And I was like, this is so different and special and exciting, and just sort of walks such a fine line of being a little, it feels a little dangerous and scandalous, and it's so different, really. And I remember talking to Elena Smith, our writer and creator, shortly after I read those 2 scripts, and she so perfectly articulated everything she wanted the season 1 to be. And from that point, I knew that it was something I wanted to be involved in.
Yeah, and it's not every day that you see Emily Dickinson twerking to hip hop, right?
It's not. No, it's not every day. This is definitely unlike any Emily Dickinson story you have seen or heard. So that is also just something I'm definitely looking forward to seeing and introducing people to, or reintroducing people to her work and her poetry, because although this show is very wild in the sense that there is twerking.
Some wild nights.
There are some wild nights. It is very driven by her poetry and the themes of her poetry, which are incredibly real and vulnerable and authentic. And that's what the show is.
And she's also a little bit of a rebel, a wild child in this. Were you able to relate to that at all?
Parts of it. I think a lot of her rebellion comes from fighting against constraints. And as a young woman in her time, she was forbidden to, have any creative fulfillment, to write, to read, to go to the circus, which was just a world of color and creativity. She was forbidden to experience any of that. And she wasn't about to let that stop her from doing the one thing that made her feel alive. And I truly feel like, Emily is nothing without her writing. Yeah. And I feel the same way about my art. And so I do feel like I connect with her on certain levels of that rebellion, where she wouldn't take no for an answer. She wouldn't let anybody make her believe that wasn't what she was meant to do, right?
Yeah.
And I definitely am inspired by that.
Yeah, and being that modern millennial woman. Were you able to pull from that and relate to that? Because you very much are this modern woman.
Thank you. Yeah, I definitely. I think it's what's so cool about the show is that so much of what they dealt with then is somehow similar, very similar to a lot of situations we, as people in general, are dealing with, but women specifically. This show is about, one, not being put in a box and not having to label a certain behavior or feeling. And it's about being seen and understood. And Emily spent the majority of her life fighting to be understood and heard at times. And constantly went back and forth as to, whether or not she wanted her poetry published. Of course she did, but then would go through waves of not wanting it, or maybe, I don't know, there's so much that's sort of left unsaid or unknown for that matter. But yeah, I definitely can relate to that part of her as well.
Mm-hmm. And how much historical context went into the show? Because there were some scenes, I was thinking about that opium scene, right? And I'm like, whoa, they know how to party.
Yeah, they do know how to party.
But also I heard that it was popular for people to experiment with opium back in the day. So how much of that was embedded in her history?
A lot of it, in fact, all of it. Elena Smith, our writer, she did so much research, as did all of us, but everything stems from a truth. She just expanded on all of it in order to make this show as fun and exciting as it is. But she, from the get-go has been my Emily Dickinson encyclopedia. And of course there are little known facts, but a lot that we might know about her. And there have been other, pieces in film and television on Emily Dickinson. And what's great about this is it's not a straightforward biopic. It's very much its own thing, and our interpretation of her and her poetry and what might possibly have been going through her mind and her soul at the times that she was, writing these poems. And so that's us kind of playing out those moments. And that episode, particularly, Wild Nights, is one of my favorite poems and one of my favorite episodes.
Yeah, I loved it. And then there was also her relationship with Sue, and I didn't know about that. So how much of that was pulled from history? Well,
it is. I do know that even today there are Dickinson scholars that are still, chipping away at the details of that and uncovering more and more every day about her relationship with Sue. But it is said that she was in love with her. And wrote poems to her and about their relationship. And it's truly so complex. And I fell in love with the way that we kind of explored that relationship, because it's so special and intimate, and there's such a true understanding between the two of them. And like I said a second ago, Emily spent the majority of her life struggling to be understood, and there was one person, or one of very few, that she felt truly loved her for who she was, and that happened to be a woman, and later her sister-in-law. So it's again another wild ride that is just another part of her life, but something I really love, and love how it's incorporated into the show. And again, like I said a second ago, this show is about not putting people in a box, and they didn't necessarily have the language that we do now, the labels and the terminology, and I think that our show sort of perfectly captures that love is love, and understanding one another is something so rare and special, and I think that we really find that in this show. Mm-hmm.
You also got to work with Wiz Khalifa in this, who was amazing as Death. Yeah. What was it like working with him?
It was so fun. It was kind of a whirlwind. It all happened so fast. He came in, he was on the middle of working on a record, I believe. But yeah, he was so wonderful, and best sense of humor.
So natural,
too. So natural,
yeah.
Like a great actor.
And this was his first acting gig,
I believe so.
Mm-hmm.
He was so prepared and truly loved the work, the material, and wanted to do a really great job, and he definitely did.
Mm-hmm. So now that you guys work together, are there talks of a collaboration possibly?
Musically?
Mm-hmm.
Well, There can be. He and I we got to talking about a bunch of music chat in between takes and whatnot. And those sort of conversations, I feel like, they're kind of sometimes they're like, when people are like, we should go to lunch, we should grab coffee, and you're like, yeah, for sure, and then you realize you've been saying it for like 2 years and nothing's happened.
Absolutely.
I don't know, I feel like, those conversations kind of, always sort of had, or the idea is always suggested, but him and I have definitely kept in touch, and I'm a huge fan of him personally and musically, so we'll see. That would be awesome.
Yeah, and speaking of singing and music, the soundtrack to this show is so awesome.
Thank you.
I mean, you had Billie Eilish, A$AP Rocky, there were a couple others, right? And you also wrote a song for this show. What was that experience like?
Anytime I get to combine my two passions, it's truly a dream. And I always want to only do it if it makes sense, and if the other filmmakers involved feel that whatever that song is accurately represents the piece that we're portraying. And when it came to Afterlife, well, first, the music was a huge part of why I also wanted to be involved in this. It almost plays its own character in the show, and the soundtrack is on repeat for me and has been for a while.
Now, having done a show that's so heavily influenced by poetry, did that impact or affect your own songwriting in any way?
Absolutely. I always love when I have those full circle moments of, I get taken away from music every so often when I have a wonderful opportunity like Dickinson come up, and I'm sort of out of, I'm still writing, but I'm out of studio mode, right, if you will, for 3, 4, 5 months at a time. And I always love when I get back into the studio and I'm like, wow, so that was that one part of whatever was driving me insane or stressing me out at that one point is good for something, and it's right now, and it all works out, right? And with this, I got back into the studio after we wrapped season 1, and I just sort of like, I was so ready to just, maybe it's because I'd been away from it for a couple months, or I don't know, but I got to the studio and I was so overly eager to write about everything that was on my mind. And I really do think it's because of the fact that Emily was so unafraid and so unapologetic when it came to herself and her writing. She truly was fearless in her writing, and I halfway, well, not even halfway, but a couple weeks into writing, I was like, wow, I really do think like that definitely played a part in it. So I do feel like I've got this new sort of fearless approach to my writing.
So you're writing new music. Are we going to hear some of that soon?
Imagine. Nah. Yes, of course.
All this writing. You're like, nah, maybe not.
Just keep it and put it in a drawer like Emily did. Maybe somebody will find it in 200 years. No, I will be putting new music out early next year, and I'm very excited. It's been a long time coming, but it's all coming together, and I'm getting there. So I'm very excited for people to hear it.
So acting, singing, producing, I mean, what's the next challenge you want to tackle?
Oh boy, next challenge. Well, I discovered earlier today that I can't cook, so maybe I'll take that challenge on and just work on it in the meantime.
Put on a little cooking show?
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. All right, Hailee, so much fun hanging out.
You.
Thank you again for joining us.
Of course, thank you.